Hello and welcome to the March Crane Research Forum. Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Dr. Rebecca Dorr, and I'm the Director of Research here at the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy. My colleague Kathy is going to be monitoring our chat box today, and we'll be adding housekeeping items there. These monthly forums feature research on emerging or key topics that impact the field of early childcare and education. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Ji-Young Choi. Dr. Choi is a Crane Faculty Associate and an associate professor of human development and family science here at The Ohio State University. She's an expert on early childhood development among multilingual learners. Her work focuses on researching two related areas. First, how and why individual differences in development emerge between birth and age 5. And secondly, how to better support this early development for children from linguistically and economically diverse backgrounds. She has served as principal and co-investigator on several federally funded research projects and has published peer-reviewed studies in leading research journals. Today, Dr. Choi will expand our understanding of the experiences and development of dual language learners in preschool classrooms, where English is the primary language of instruction and interaction. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Choi.
Thank you, Dr. Dorr, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm really excited to talk with you about the development and experiences of dual language learners in early care and education settings. In this forum, I will start by giving an overview of who dual language learners are and how our understanding of their development has evolved over time. I will also share findings from my research comparing the preschool classroom experiences of dual language learners to those of their non-dual language learning peers. About halfway through, we will do a short survey activity with Kathy's help. As mentioned, please share your questions, thoughts, and insights in the chat box at any time during the presentation. And Kathy and Dr. Dorr will help me revisit your questions and input toward the end. All right. So let's start by defining who dual language learners are. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Education released a joint statement defining this group, and here is how they describe it. So dual language learners are children who have a home language other than English and are learning two or more languages at the same time, or learning a second language while continuing to develop their first language. So we typically use the term DLLs for children between the ages of 0 to 5 and sometimes up to 8. And this term emphasizes that at this early age, children are developing both English and their home languages. So the focus is on developing both languages rather than solely learning English. On the other hand, the term English language learner, ELL, is more commonly used in older school-aged children when children already established a foundation in their home language. The term primarily emphasizes their learning of English as a second language. So there is a distinction between the two terms, with one emphasizing both language development and the other focusing primarily on English learning. So in this talk, I will focus on dual language learners ages between 0 to 5. In the US, dual language learners represent a large and rapid growing population, which is likely why we have received so much attention in recent years. So nationwide, about 1/3 of children ages 0 to 5 have at least one parent who speaks a language other than English at home. The majority of dual language learners, so about 95% of them, are US born, and approximately 33% of dual language learners have both parents who are US born. Spanish is the most common non-English language spoken in DLL households. However, nationwide, students represented in the public school system speak over 400 different languages. Just out of curiosity, I checked Ohio's statistics, and students in Ohio's school system speak about 90 different languages. So 90. So this really shows how dual language learners come from a wide range of linguistic backgrounds. For many years, dual language learners were considered at risk for developmental challenges. There has been a belief, or I should say misbelief, that learning two languages could be harmful to children's development. So here is one example from a child psychology textbook published in 1952. So it states that there can be no doubt that the child reared in a bilingual environment is handicapped in his language growth. One can debate the issue as to whether speech facility in two languages is worth the consequent retardation in the common language of the realm. So the concern back then was that learning multiple languages would overwhelm children and slow their learning. A more recent example comes from a report by the National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, which categorized primary home language was non-English as a family risk factor, along with poverty, low maternal education, and single-parent household. As many of you know, this deficit-based perspective on dual language learners is outdated and no longer supported by research. Over the last few decades, our understanding of dual language learners has grown a lot. We've learned so much, and one of the most important takeaways is that being bilingual isn't a disadvantage. It actually has many benefits. So research shows that bilingual people are better at learning new languages and picking up sounds. A study published in Child Development found that 18 to 20-month-olds raised in a bilingual environment with English and Mandarin were better at learning a third language than children raised in a monolingual English environment. Now, when it comes to the cognitive benefits of bilingualism, there's still some debate. In the past, I would say that bilingualism helps with things like impulse control, attention shifting, and short-term memory, which are all part of skill sets called executive function. So there is some evidence supporting bilingualism's benefits in cognition, but findings aren't always consistent. So some major studies have had trouble replicating evidence for these cognitive benefits. So I would say research is still ongoing to reach a definitive conclusion. But the bottom line is that bilingualism, at the very least, doesn't have a disadvantage when it comes to cognitive development. There are other well-established benefits of bilingualism too. So it helps people understand different perspectives, possibly because bilingualism exposes them to different ways of thinking and living from two different cultures. And it also delays the onset of dementia by about 4 years. If you've seen, dementia up close, you know how significant those extra years of healthy life can be. And plus, bilingualism offers economic advantages at both the personal level and societal levels. So according to a report from the U.S. Committee on Economic Development, American businesses lose over $2 billion a year because of language or cultural misunderstandings. So there's really no reason not to promote bilingualism at both the personal and societal levels. So in fact, we have every reason to support it. So knowing that supporting bilingualism is important, a key question my team raised was, do all dual language learners grow up to become bilingual? So we know that all dual language learners have the potential to become bilingual, who can function in two languages. But the real question is, can they fully take advantage of this great opportunity? So my team explored this question in one of our studies using the nationally representative Head Start Faces of Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey, so Faces 2009 data set. And this research was possible through funding from the American Education Research Association. So in this project, we studied Spanish English dual language learners from Head Start programs. So Head Start is a federally funded early childhood education program primarily serving low-income families, as many of you probably know. So to ensure that our sample is nationally representative of Head Start, we applied sampling weights in our analysis, and this makes our findings generalizable on a national scale. So basically, our team aimed at identifying patterns of dual language learning over the 2.5 years between Head Start entry and kindergarten. And we empirically found three groups of dual language learners based on their learning patterns in Spanish and English. So more than half of the children fell into the balanced bilingual group, so who were represented by the large dotted line. And these children function in both languages. They showed rapid growth in English skills over the 2.5 years between Head Start entry and kindergarten. They also maintained steady gains in Spanish during the same duration. And about 20%, so 21% of children were grouped into the Spanish dominant dual language learner group. They are represented by this bold line. And these children had relatively strong home language skills, but limited English proficiency compared to other groups of children. They initially had low English skills at the entry of Head Start, and also showed somewhat slower gains in English, but maintained strong Spanish skills over time. And the last group, so English dominant dual language learners, about 25% of children were grouped into this group, and they were represented by the small dotted line. And these children showed minimal gains in their home language, although they had comparable Spanish skills at Head Start entry to other groups. Their English skills and growth rates fell between those of bilingual group, the balanced bilingual group, and the Spanish dominant dual language learners. So this study shows that even during the preschool and kindergarten years, we see different patterns of development in two languages. Some function fairly well in both languages they are learning, while others are more like monolinguals. In this study, we also looked into whether there are differences in their kindergarten math and literacy skills. And we found that balanced bilingual group children performed better in both outcomes. So English dominant and Spanish dominant dual language learners showed no statistical significant differences in both math and literacy in kindergarten. And one thing I want to note is that these kindergarten tests were conducted in English. So English dominant dual language learners had an advantage in this test over Spanish dominant dual language learners. But again, we found no statistical differences between these two groups functioning performance in these two kindergarten outcomes. So all the children in this sample attended Head Start, and their initial entry skills in both languages were relatively similar to those in the later years. So this means we can infer that the Head Start environment likely played a significant role in shaping these differences. So a relevant question we raised was, are our early childhood programs helping dual language learners become successful bilinguals? So as a first step in answering this broad question, my team focused on understanding what dual language learners' experiences are like in early childhood education programs, especially in comparison to English monolinguals. So today I will share 3 studies on dual language learners' preschool experiences in multilingual classrooms where no single dominant non-English language is used. We know from research that dual language learners are much better off developmentally when they attend high quality early childhood education programs than when they do not. Building on that knowledge, my team wanted to explore whether classroom experiences differ between dual language learners and their English monolingual peers in preschool classrooms. I will present 3 of my team's studies on dual language learners' preschool classroom experiences, focusing on the 3 key factors: teacher preparation, teacher perception and preparation, classroom verbal actions, and peer play interactions. You will find that these 3 studies consistently show that dual language learners tend to have different and, in many cases, less stimulating classroom experiences compared to their non-DLL peers. So the first study with internal funding, one of the first projects we conducted to learn about dual language learners' experiences in preschool involved simply listening to teachers and learning about their practices. So we interviewed 8 Head Start lead teachers and observed their classroom environments. Our teachers were all English monolinguals, and they had between 3 to 16 dual language learners in their classrooms. And the number of language represented in each classroom ranged from 1 to 5, excluding English. And we found that the use of non-English words in these classrooms was minimal. In half of the classrooms, a language other than English was not used at all. And on average, teachers used less than 1%, actually less than 0.5% of their speech in a non-English language. Even this estimation is likely overestimated, as we assumed any word we couldn't identify in English was non-English language. So these descriptive statistics show that home language exposure is likely minimal in these multilingual Head Start classrooms. As part of this study, we asked teachers about their understanding of dual language learning and education. Before sharing the results, I thought we could try out the questionnaire ourselves. So I've brought a few questions from the survey for us to go through together. Kathy will be helping me running the Zoom poll. Thank you, Kathy. There are 5 questions, and for each one, you will respond on a scale from 1 to 5. 1 meaning strongly disagree, and 5 meaning strongly agree. And we will go through all 5 questions together. And after completing the survey, we will review the results together, and it will show the average ratings for each questions. So the first question, I believe you should be able to see the poll. The first question asks, parents of dual language learners should speak English with their children whenever possible to help them learn the language faster. So what do you think? So 1 indicating strongly disagree, 5 indicating strongly agree. And the second question is, students should only speak English in the classroom, especially dual language learners who need the most practice. And the third question asks, Mixing different languages in one environment confuses children and should be discouraged. And the fourth question, it's best if dual language learners are introduced to an English-only instructional environment as early as possible. And the last question is, native English speakers may experience academic and language delays in dual language programs. So I will give you a few more seconds to wrap up. And Kathy, please pull out the results when they are ready to share.
There's a few more coming in, so I'm just going to let it run for one more second.
Sounds great. I really appreciate that you responding these questions thoroughly and thoughtfully and taking time. All right, so we see the results. Wonderful. Okay, the first question. So 34% saying that strongly disagree and 3% strongly agree. I'm wondering whether we can see mean scores for these questions. If not, that's okay. So you can see there's quite a bit of range in these responses, but the majority of the responses are between 1 or 2, looks like, across all these questions, which is wonderful. Some of you may have noticed that all of these statements are a pretty common misconception about dual language education. So let's take a look at each statement. The first one, parents of dual language learners should speak English with their children whenever possible to help them learn the language faster. So we know that parents should use the language they are most fluent in. So for non-native English speaking parents like myself, speaking English doesn't necessarily help their child learn English faster, and it actually could limit the child's chance to develop their home language. So the recommendation for parents is to speak the language they are most fluent in with their children, as this allows them to be a strong language models. So the next 2 questions, actually next 3 questions, are essentially asking the same thing, whether home language should be used and encouraged in the classroom. So the second question, students should only speak English in the classroom, especially dual language learners who need the most practice. And the third one, mixing different languages in one environment confuses children and should be discouraged. There is a substantial amount of research showing how important it is to develop and maintain home language skills. And one way to do that is by encouraging home language exposure and use in the classroom when possible. So we know that when children have strong home language skills, they actually learn a second language better. Dual language learners do need support for English development, just like any other children. But studies show that just focusing on English isn't the answer. And the fourth question, it's best if dual language learners are introduced to an English-only instructional environment as early as possible. So not if it means they lose the chance to develop their home language. So once children become school-aged, parents actually worry more about their kids losing their home language skills than about not being fluent in English. And I think we should keep in mind that children have far more opportunities to learn English in the U.S. educational system than they do to maintain and develop their home language. And the last question, So native English speakers may experience academic and language delays in dual language programs. So in dual language programs, two languages like Spanish and English are integrated into the curriculum for instruction. We need more studies, but there's evidence that shows English speakers learning isn't hindered in dual language programs. And these programs actually help English monolinguals learn a second language like Spanish. So the current evidence shows us the benefits of dual language programs for both English monolinguals and dual language learners. So thank you again, Kathy, for running this poll, and thank you everyone participating in this survey. So going back to the study with Head Start teachers, let's take a look how they responded to these 5 questions. If we look at the mean scores, teachers generally did not agree with the statement, just like we did. But you see that there's quite a bit of variation or differences in their responses, from strongly disagree to strongly agree in some cases. One theme we found from teacher interview in this study was that Head Start teachers were unsure about their practices with dual language learners. In her interview, one teacher said that in my education, when I'm getting my bachelor's, they didn't really talk about dual language learners a lot. They alluded to it, but they didn't talk about DLL. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't feel like I'm adequately capable of teaching dual language learners. So this study was conducted about 5 years ago when DLL education resources were even more limited than now. So please consider that context. But this study suggests that teachers might need extra support to better assist dual language learners, even in programs like Head Start, which has been considered as a model EC program, especially for DLL education. So moving to the second study, in this study, we looked into verbal interactions in preschool classrooms. This study was possible with funding support from the Society for Research in Child Development. And in this study, we compared children's language exposure and use between dual language learners and English monolinguals in preschool classrooms. We had 32 children from 6 classrooms across 3 child care centers, including Head Start, local child care, and university lab school. And all classrooms used English as the main language of instruction, and all lead teachers were English monolinguals. And we used a technology called Lina. Some of you may know about it. So Lina involves a recorder and an analysis program that automatically calculates the counts of language use and exposure. So children wear the Lina devices in a specially designed vest or t-shirts like you see in this picture. And the Lina system then provides data like adults' words counts, which is the number of words spoken by teachers near the child, near the focal child, and the child vocalization, the number of words spoken by the focal child, and the number of conversation turns the child had with adults. We collected 34 hours of classroom recordings over 1 or 2 weeks period for each child while they were in their classrooms. Then we compared the Lina estimates between monolinguals and dual language learners. So here's what we found. I know this graph can look a bit overwhelming, so let me walk you through it. So this graph is for adult word counts. So it represents the number of words teachers used near the focal child. And each child data is graphed here. The different shapes represent the classrooms they belong to. So all of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 children were from the same classroom. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these children were from another classroom. Monolinguals data is shown in this blue area, and dual language learners data is shown in this yellow area. And these black dots indicate the model estimated mean score, and there are standard error bars. So what this graph shows is that dual language learners had less exposure to teacher talk compared to their English monolingual peers. So dual language learners' estimated mean score was lower than those for English monolinguals. When we examined child vocalization, and we found no differences, so dual language learners did not necessarily speak less than English monolinguals. And we also did not find differences in the number of conversation turns the child had with adults. In our follow-up analysis, we learned that teachers spoke less when children initiated conversation and spoke more when they initiated conversation. And this was true for both English monolinguals and dual language learners, but the pattern was especially evident for dual language learners. So in other words, the teachers tend to talk less when child initiated conversations, especially when dual language learners initiated the conversations. So this study suggests that typical US preschool settings where English is the primary language may provide a less enriching language environment or experiences for dual language learners. So far, we've looked into teacher perceptions in preparation, as well as classroom verbal interactions. In the third study, we examined peer play interactions. So peer interactions are important because peers are key learning partners in early childhood. Research shows that children actually talk more with their peers than with their teachers in preschool classrooms, which makes sense. If we think about it, there are usually only 2 teachers for about 20 kids in a preschool classroom. So there are more conversation partners among peers. This study was conducted a few years ago here in Ohio with my Ohio State colleagues and students. And this study was made possible thanks to the generous support from the Crane Center. To briefly explain, we had 26 children from 5 classrooms across 3 local preschool centers. We also obtained passive consent from all the children's parents in the classroom. And this made it possible for us to have full data on peer play interactions in each of the 5 classrooms. Teachers fill out a survey looking like this one to report how often how often 2 children played together. So for example, if Harry and Hermione played together often, the teacher would put the number 3. If Harry and Albus never played together, they would put a 0 and so on. So using this data, we were able to create figures that represent the peer play network, like this one. So the figure presents children from 5 classrooms, with each grouping indicating peer interactions in each classroom. So each circle or square in the figure represent a child. Dual language learners are shown as a square, and all other children are represented in circle. And there was only one DLL with low English proficiency in this study, and this child is shown in red. And no dual language learners were recruited from one classroom. So one thing I should mention is that we know there were more dual language learners in these classrooms, but we were only able to identify children's DLL status for children whose parents consented to participate in this study. So please keep that in mind when looking at these figures. So how you read this figure is children in the middle are more central in peer play interactions within each classroom. And children on the outer part of the connection are more isolated in play. The thicker line and larger circles or squares indicate more connections or more play with other children. So you see that dual language learners are positioned less centrally in their peer play networks, which means they have fewer peer interactions with other children in the classroom. And this was true for both dual language learners with high English proficiency as well as low English proficiency. In this study, we also considered children's English expressive skills as well as behavioral problems to see how those skill sets are associated with their peer play network. But DLL status was the only significant predictor of children's peer networks in this study. This is a small sample, so it requires further investigation with a larger group of children. But this study provides some initial evidence suggesting that dual language learners' classroom peer experiences might differ from those of non-DLLs in English-dominant preschool classrooms. So these three studies I've presented indicate that there are areas where we can do better to support dual language learners. So specifically, preschool teachers could benefit from additional support to better assist dual language learners. When interacting with children, we need to be more mindful of whom we engage with more and whom we may unintentionally speak to less. And peer dynamics and networks can also differ for dual language learners in multilingual classrooms where English is used as a sole language of instruction and interaction. The National Academics of Science, Engineering, and Medicine published a book summarizing what science reveals about bilingualism. And one of their conclusions was that all ECA teachers of dual language learners can learn and implement strategies that systematically introduce English during the infant, toddler, and preschool years, while simultaneously promoting maintenance of the home language, an important principle. Not all teachers can teach all languages, but all teachers can learn specific strategies that support the maintenance of all languages. I will quickly highlight a few suggestions, few suggested strategies for DLL education. This list is adopted from a book by Drs. Lopez and Pace. And if you have any strategies you've found effective or have suggestions about DLL education, please share them in the chat box so that we can all benefit from your experience. I will make sure to revisit it at the end of the presentation. And so the suggestions include make the most of small group and one-to-one activities, use explicit vocabulary instruction for new words, teach vocabulary in both languages, and teachers are encouraged to learn some keywords in dual language learners' home language, and support dual language learners' language by using repetition and modeling of new words, and supplement spoken words with gestures, visual aids, and props, especially for children with limited English skills. Excuse me. During free choice time and the dramatic play time, especially encourage sustained back and forth conversations that build language skills. And use peers as learning partner, learning mate. So pair dual language learners with peer buddies who speak English as a first language to reinforce the development of skills in English during activities, but also pair dual language learners with another child who speaks their home languages as well when possible. And technology tools can be great resource. I'm personally excited about the advancements we can make in DLL education as AI continues to progress. If you know of any technologies that has been effective for you, please share that information with us as well. All right, so in the study with the Head Start teachers I presented earlier, Teachers shared several resources they found helpful in their practice. So on this slide, you see direct quotes from teacher interviews with key terms highlighted in bold. Very quickly, so one teacher shared that having an interpreter was helpful. So she explained that she poses a question of the day to children, like what makes you sad? And she arranged for administrative staff to have someone interpret those questions into Spanish. And after doing that, she noticed increased participation from Spanish-speaking children. And another teacher shared that parents play really important role, and she shared that some parents even recorded group time sessions so they could interpret them for their children later. There was also mention of the value of bilingual assistant teachers or bilingual teachers in helping children understand instructions, communicate with parents, and even read books in their home language. Very similarly, another teacher highlighted the benefit of having coworkers who speak other language. So she shared that working with bilingual colleagues was more accessible and convenient than relying on an interpreter. And another teacher said, the same teacher shared she mentioned about the app called Remind, where she sends texts to parents in English, and the parents' phone automatically translate the message into their home language. So she found it very helpful. And another teacher, I should mention that, so she made a comments that using technology for communication feels a bit clinical for her, and it actually made her it was very difficult for her to build a relationship. So there were mixed feelings about the use of technology among teachers. So you can read full teacher quotes in the journal where this study was published. I will share all the presentation materials and the original journal links in case you would like to access to them. And before I finish, I would like to share an observation note I received from my first child's teacher when James, my first child, was a toddler. So we met the teacher while living in Iowa, and she was a monolingual teacher. And I really treasure this note, and I believe it's a great example of the kind of meaningful interaction monolingual teachers can have with dual language learners. So the note says, today James, my child, noticed a friend reading an animal book with teacher Emily. I came and sat next to them. Emily pointed to the pictures and my friend named them in Mandarin. Emily said the name in English. I pointed to the picture next and said the name in Korean. Emily tried to say it too and asked me if she was saying it right. I smiled at her and shook my head no, and she laughed and said she would keep trying. So this note made me realize how important it is for teachers to show that they value each child's language and culture. Interactions like this can help dual language learners feel proud of being bilingual. As a parent, I truly appreciated this kind of moments. When it comes to language learning, exposure and use matter, and so does motivation and attitude toward the language. These are really important factors as well. So a few years ago, when my parents were visiting us from South Korea, James, my first child, asked them not to speak Korean outside because he was worried that people might laugh at us. And I was surprised. So I asked him why. And James then shared an experience from his preschool. He was 4 years old at the time. And James said his peers had laughed at a Japanese song their teacher played, and his Japanese friend became upset. I believe everyone's intention was good. The teacher aimed to expose the children to a different language, and the kids were probably just reacting to unfamiliar sounds. rather than intentionally teasing anyone. However, when such incidences accumulate over time, they can have a profound impact on dual language learners, I believe. Um, so at that time, James was really into superheroes. So I explained to him that knowing multiple languages is like having a superpower. So thankfully, he bought it. So yeah, I was really thankful for that. I haven't conducted much research on social emotional support and DLL development myself, but I see a growing need to explore this area, especially in multilingual classrooms in the future. All right, that is all I have prepared for today. Thank you all for your time and attention. I want to express my deep appreciation to my colleagues, graduate students, and undergraduate students. So this work would not have been possible without them. And a special thank you to the directors, teachers, and parents joining us today who participated in the studies I've presented. So your contributions are essential to advancing our field. And then lastly, I also want to acknowledge the funders of the studies I've shared today, including the Crane Center, Iowa State University, AERA, and SRCD for their generous support. And now I will turn it over to Kathy or Dr. Dorr to help me check our checkbox.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much. We definitely have questions coming in the question and answer box, but audience members, please do continue adding those there. We have a few minutes left to get some of those questions answered. The first one that came in early in the talk was about the finding that DLLs were exposed to less teacher talk than non-DLLs. And the attendee asks, is that true of adults as well when children are in other settings, for example, the doctor's office, or are there other places where this might also transfer over? It's a little speculative, but do you have any either thoughts or data to answer that question?
Yeah, that is really great question. Actually, thought-provoking question. I do not have data or research backupping my response here. But my speculation, my assumption is there probably are. So the one reason why we thought that there could be differences in teacher talk between dual language learners and non-dual language learners could be because teachers feel more comfortable interacting with English monolinguals over dual language learners, mainly possibly because sometimes teachers cannot understand what dual language learners are saying if they have low English proficiency. And sometimes what dual language learners know and their interest might a bit different from English monolinguals. So my child is really into Pokemon. So thankfully, every kids are into Pokemon. But he's also into Bororo, which is Korean character. And if James would say about Bororo, no one would. I mean, I expect that no one would know what James is talking about. So there could be those like contextual factors play here, and the same could be applicable for other settings, I assume. And the cultural expectation, especially for the doctor's office, I had an interesting chat with my colleagues regarding that. In my culture, we don't typically ask questions to doctors, and doctors do not expect patients to ask questions. And in here, I think it's kind of opposite. So those cultural expectations also play a role, play a role. So my expectation, my assumption is yes, but again, I do not have data backing up my assumption. Thank you for the question.
Sure. Yeah. Another question came in. Have there been any studies regarding homes that have more than two languages? So this audience member says, my niece's dad speaks Arabic, mom speaks English, and nanny spoke Spanish. Do you have any data or speculation on that front?
Yeah, great question. So I'm actually conducting a study using the FACES data, which is nationally Head Start data set. And we are trying to identify how to define dual language learners. And while doing that, we realized that there are quite number of children who has more than two home languages. So yeah, that's definitely the area that needs more attention. Off top of my head, I cannot think about studies that specifically looked into multilinguals. Yeah,
Yeah, that'd
and
be
I
really,
haven't personally, yeah, conducted this research on that, but I do see the needs for it.
yeah, absolutely. Another question came in about, again, other data, but do you have any leaner results for populations of children, younger children, ages 1 to 3, to follow up on your other findings?
Well, no, but that could be really interesting research to pursue. Yeah, if you're a funder, please fund us to do those kind of interesting, yeah,
There
study.
you go. One question came in about how dual language learners' second language development can better foster children's cognitive and non-cognitive skills. Can you speak to any sort of the idea that monolingual children should be encouraged to learn another language?
So can you say that question one more time for me?
Sure. The question was about some of the advantages you mentioned at the beginning about how dual language learners' second language can foster better cognitive and non-cognitive skills, and the idea that maybe we should actually be encouraging monolingual children to learn a second language. I just don't know if you have any speculation or research experience along those lines.
Yes, I do believe that knowing two languages would be helpful. So so in terms of cognition, as I said earlier, it's kind of still debatable between whether there actually is bilingual benefits in cognition. But many studies, including my own, has shown that when dual language learners have proficient English proficiency and they function as if they are bilinguals, they actually perform better even in academics. And some of those DLL, I mean, bilingual advantages in academics are explained by higher cognitions they performed. So I do think that this kind of findings can be applicable for English monolinguals when they learn second language. Yeah, so I expect similar, benefits for monolinguals when they learn second language. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Please chime in the question and answer box if the attendees have other follow-ups. I want to get to a few specific questions about the data that you presented today. One quick question was, when was this research data compiled? When did you collect this data?
Um, do you happen to know which specific study
They were
that
asking
that
at 12:46, about 10 minutes ago. So maybe the last portion that you spoke about.
last portion? Oh yeah, the peer interaction study. So this study, well, I wish my graduate student is here. So I believe about 3 years ago. Yeah. So
Can't be much longer than that, right? When
yeah.
did you get here?
All right. Yeah. This is my third year
Yeah, there
with
you go.
Ohio State. So yeah, about 2 to 3 years ago. Yes.
Perfect. One question that people are interested in is sort of more broadly, even outside of, I think, the bilingual students, but they noticed that in different classrooms, there were different amounts of teacher talk with children overall. Were you able to identify any factors that tend to increase teacher talk, so more training, supportive coaching, et cetera, either, overall or for bilingual children specifically?
Yep, yep, that's a really great question. So one thing I should say is that the field's focus has been increasing teacher talk mainly because we found very low frequency in teacher talk. But I personally believe that there could be threshold. If too much talk, the too much talk can be, no longer helpful or even harmful. Um, and the so what we know from research is that the conversation turns the teachers or adults have with children are more important than just teacher talking by themselves. So that I think the focus should be more on conversation turns rather than just improving or
Mhm.
increasing teacher talk by themselves. Um, So yeah, so thinking about how we can promote conversation turns between teachers and child. So from this study, says I kind of shared teachers talked less when children initiated conversations, and they talked more when they initiate the conversations. So this could be because teachers are, I mean, it's kind of human nature. We want to talk more
Mhm.
for the topic that we are interested in. So maybe being mindful about those things, and then yeah, could be one possible solution. But I do not have data to yeah back up those kind of suggestions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. One attendee mentioned teachers often say they don't know any words from the child's home language. So, sort of, how can they speak to them in the classroom if they don't know it? There may be several different languages in their classroom, and some other people chimed in saying this is a common concern that's raised by teachers. Do you have any suggestions for those teachers in classrooms?
Yeah, I totally understand the challenges teachers are experiencing. So in one study, so in the Head Start classroom, they have 16 dual language
Yeah.
learners. In one of the classrooms, they had five different languages. So the general guidance in the field is that try to learn keywords in dual language learners' home language. So if you're working with toddlers, let's say the eat or more, so those kind of keywords we typically use quite often in the children's home language could be really helpful. And sometimes just asking parents about what kind of words those, toddlers or older infants speak the most often, just learning about those few home languages that children use most often could be also helpful. And so I think this is the area where technologies can play a bit of role, although I understand that some teachers does not necessarily like using technology because it makes them feel a bit clinical about the instruction. I mean, interactions they have with children or parents. Um, but yeah, and if you are fortunate to have colleagues who are bilinguals, they
Mhm.
can be really great resource. And in my interview for this particular study, teachers also identified that parents are enthusiastic about supporting their child's learning. So maybe think about, having parents come to the class to do some voluntary um, group sessions or small group activities with children, or just ask them to write some keywords in their home languages. Actually, that's some of the things I've done when my kiddos were, my first child was young. So teachers kind of asked me to list several keywords in Korean and asked me to write how to pronounce those words. And that was like a few years ago. And now with new technologies, it's much easier to do those kind of things. If you are a ChatGPT user, if you write keywords and then say translate in English, then it'll do it in a second. So I think we can be a bit creative, but as I said, yeah, parents, the bilingual colleagues, or apps or programs technologies could be some resources we can think of. But I totally understand the difficulties teachers are experiencing in multilingual classrooms for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this has been a really wonderful presentation and conversation. Thank you again for sharing your work with us today. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. When you leave the meeting, a very short survey will pop up. Please do fill that out if you're able to. We really do value your feedback and use it to inform our future events. Thanks again for joining us and have a great day.